Welcome to episode number 7 of the Sizzle Basketball Podcast. Today I will be continuing the two-team format that I've been doing in the last few podcasts. And the two teams I'll be doing today are the Detroit Pistons and the Los Angeles Lakers. But before I get into that, I want to make one quick announcement. I have a football podcast. I'm going to put the football podcast on the same YouTube page that I have my basketball podcast on. So when those football podcasts drop, they'll be on the same page. I'm going to be dropping one of them today as well after the draft. I'm going to do a post-draft recap, give every team grades, see which teams did the best, see which teams did worse, see which picks should have been made in which spots, and so on and so forth. So I'll be doing that. I'll be dropping that podcast today. And there's a separate Instagram account for that. It's just Sizzle Football. So make sure you go give that a follow. That's the Instagram account for that. But again, it will be on the same. I will put the football podcast on the same channel as the basketball podcast. I want to keep them together on the YouTube channel. I don't want to make two separate YouTube channels for them. I think it's better to keep them together. But in terms of the Instagram, they'll be separate pages. So you'll see football and basketball podcast on the same YouTube page. And the football podcast, again, will drop tonight because, of course, tonight's the NFL draft. So it's a big night for the NFL. But let's get into our NBA podcast for today. And let me start with the Detroit Pistons. Okay. So this year for the Pistons, I think we all knew this year was going to be a really weak year for the Pistons. Last year, they got rid of Andre Drummond halfway through the year, and now they got rid of Blake Griffin earlier this year. We all knew it was going to be a rough year, even going into the year, even when they were supposed to have Blake Griffin all year. In this offseason, we all knew it would be a rough year for the Pistons because they had struggled last year, and then they lost Andre Drummond. They lost Reggie Jackson, right? So they lost a handful of guys last year. And we knew coming into the season that they weren't going to be a top team. We knew they were going to be one of the bottom teams in the league. We knew they were going to have a roster that was kind of filled with a void, right? You could say, or filled with young guys who haven't really proved themselves yet. But as Detroit this year is 19-43, they're have the third worst record in the league. Yeah, they haven't been great. They've kind of been what I expected personally. I expected them to have this amount of wins at this time of the year. But in my opinion, I think they've actually shown a little bit more progress, if anything, this year with some of their young guys and some of their players than I thought they would. Right? The first guy I want to start with is Jeremy Grant. He came over from Denver. The story there, Denver was not able to re-sign him. They didn't have the money to re-sign him, and that's a guy that Denver obviously misses a lot right now. Obviously they got Aaron Gordon, but Aaron Gordon's not as good as a player as Jeremy Grant. Jeremy Grant's a better player than Aaron Gordon, and I think they really missed Jeremy Grant in Denver because of his ability to spread the floor, shoot the ball. He plays good defense. He's a pretty good passer. He gets to the rim really well. He's got a good mid-range jumper, and they miss having him. And yeah, he's a guy. When he played with Denver, he only averaged 12 a game, and now with Detroit, he's averaging 23. And I'll get to that, the scoring outburst in a minute, but he was always a guy with Denver who was playing behind multiple scorers. He was playing behind Jokic and Murray and Michael Porter and Gary Harris and Millsap. So he was playing behind so many of these scorers that it was kind of hard for him to really be looked at and say, okay, this is like a really, really good player in the league. But for people that are big-time basketball fans that really paid close attention to the game, I think everybody always knew he was a great player because of his ability to be efficient and his ability to shoot the ball. And every time Denver needed him to step up, and he's a great defender, and every time Denver needed him to step up and make good big plays for them when they had him, he did. I think last year against the Lakers, the one game they won, they lost the series 4-1. I believe it was game 3 that they won. He had 27 points on 80-something% shooting and played great defense on Anthony Davis too. So he's a guy that, not just in that game, but in a lot of games for Denver last year and the previous years he played in Denver, really stepped up for that team in the big-time moments. But if you went and looked at his numbers in the box score, you wouldn't look at him and be like, oh, he's a great player. But in reality, he is a great player, right? And I think, like I said, people that really pay close attention to the game of basketball knew that all along. And that's why it was cool when I saw him, in my opinion, sign with Detroit, because I knew it would be an opportunity for him to really show everybody how good he is. And of course, people are going to put the label on him like, oh, he's only playing this well because he doesn't have much help around him and he's on this team and blah, blah, blah. But really, I think Detroit's enjoyed having him there. I think he's really shown everybody in the NBA world how good he really is. And I think he was this good all along. He was a guy in Denver who could have probably averaged 20 plus. It's just the touches were never there. Right now he's averaging 23. He averages like 5, 6 rebounds. He's a great defender, as I mentioned. He's an underrated passer. He shoots a three ball like 35, 36%. He's made like 100 plus threes this year. So, I mean, yeah, he's a guy who can do a little bit of everything, and one of the better two-way players in basketball, in my opinion. And he was the front runner for most improved player for almost the entire season. And now he's missed a couple of games. And, now you have Julius Randle just playing at a ridiculous level the last month or month and a half. So I think they'll end up giving it to Julius Randle, because of Jeremy Grant's injuries and just because of how well Julius Randle's been playing the last month. But, Jeremy Grant has been great this season. I mean, he's been a guy who I think could be a future All-Star. I think we can look at him in a year or two and say he could be an All-Star. That's my personal opinion about Jeremy Grant. He's 27, so he still has a little bit of time left to continue to develop his game. And a lot of people, like I said earlier, would make the argument that, he's on a worse team. That's why he's putting up the numbers. But if you really pay attention, you watch the games, I think that's not true because you can just see he's so much smoother in the way he shoots the ball. He's more sound defensively than he was last year with Denver. He has a great ability to get to the rim, which he had with Denver last year, but now it's like his first step is quicker. He has a better idea of where he's going and what spots to choose and pick. The game's slowing down for him now, right? And he's got a little post fade in his game now too. So he's added these different aspects to his game, and that's why he's averaging 23 because he's just, he was really good all along, but he's gotten even better. It's not because he's on the Pistons. He's averaging 23 because he's that good of a player, right? I mean, realistically, he's probably one of the 50 best players in the world, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, I think Detroit's happy what they have with him. I think when they originally signed him, they didn't think he would play this well. I think they're very surprised, and I think he's a guy that they want to keep and build around because this is a team also, as I mentioned earlier, who has some young players that are a little intriguing when you think about it, right? I mean, you have a rookie in Saddiq Bey, who is the best three-point shooter out of all the rookies in the draft class right now. He has, over the year, developed his ability to put the ball on the floor. He's a solid defensive player. He needs a little work on defense, but he's solid. He's good enough for a first-year guy. But he's shown an ability to put the ball on the floor and score in multiple different ways. He came in as just a shooter, as I mentioned. He's the best shooter in his class, out of all the rookies in his class. But he came in as really out of Villanova as just a shooter, pure shooter. And now, as the years developed in Detroit, as I mentioned earlier, he's been able to put the ball on the floor and develop his offensive game a little more, which is scary because, a lot of rookies don't develop throughout their first year. They kind of just stay the same, or they play really well throughout the whole year, or they play really bad, right? They don't trend up a lot as the year progresses. So for him to be able to trend up in the way he has since the years progress is really impressive. I mean, he's shooting 37% from three-point range. He's made 139 threes. Great free throw shooter. When he gets to the line, he makes them. And he has gotten to the line a good amount this year. He's gotten more if you look at, as I said, if you look at what he's done the last couple of months and towards this, as the season's progressed, he's obviously put the ball on the floor more. And that also leads to him shooting more free throws. He shot way more free throws towards the end of the season, in the second half of the season after the All-Star break. And when he gets to the line, he makes them. He shoots around 88%. So not only is him putting on the ball on the floor going to help his scoring, right, in terms of just stats, it's also going to help him get to the free throw line, obviously. And that's a spot where he can make them. So, a huge benefit to his game and a huge thing that will help him continue to score for a long time in his career is the ability, to make the free throw. And it's not just, a lot of guys can make free throws, but it's can you get to the free throw line consistently? And he's shown that throughout the year towards the end of the year, that he can get to the line more consistently. So he continues to progress that part of his game. He's a guy next year who could average, 16 minimum. I could see him almost averaging 20 next year if he continues to put the ball on the floor even more and get to the free throw line, because when he gets to the free throw line, as I mentioned, he makes it. He's showing a little bit of athleticism in his game too. He can throw it down. He's shown an ability to take those step back mid range jumpers off the dribble, which is a lot of guys don't have in their game at all, especially at a young age, and he's shown that. So, definitely a steal for Detroit this year in the draft. In my opinion, he went 19. He'll go down as one of the bigger steals in the draft. When this draft class is, in a couple of years, when we look at this draft class, we'll say Saddiq Bey was one of the biggest steals in the draft of 2020. So, got to keep our eye out on Saddiq Bey for the next couple of years because he's going to be a special player. Another player I want to briefly talk about is Hamidou Diallo, who they recently traded for at the trade deadline a couple months ago from OKC, and I thought it was a good trade for Detroit. They added another guard, which is a spot that they could use a little bit of help with. And Hamidou Diallo is 22 years old now. He's in his third season in the league. And he's shown flashes at times, and then other times he kind of falls off and he doesn't really show an ability to score consistently. We know he's a freak of an athlete. He can get to the rim. He's got a really quick first step. Now it's just, can you shoot the three ball? He's shooting at 33% this year. He's made under 33. So now that's the next step of his game. That and the defensive end. Those are the two next steps of his game that he needs to take to be able to be looked at as a solid number 2 option, right? I mean, you really look at a guy like Hamidou Diallo, he's probably going to be a role player for the majority of his career, but he can be a very solid 6-man or even a decent starting shooting guard if you can surround him with good players in the other 4 positions, which Detroit can do eventually when the time comes. But you have to make sure Hamidou Diallo develops his 3-point shot and he develops an ability to play defense because he has the build to play defense. He's 6'5", he weighs around 200 pounds, and he's strong, he's physical at times on the defensive end. But it just hasn't been there consistently on the defensive end, and that's why he's not a great defensive player yet. So he shows an ability to be more physical on defense in these upcoming years and to just really kind of be a pest to guys on the offensive end. He can be a great defensive player and develop his 3-point shot. He can be a great 3-and-D kind of guy. He could be a great player for this team, and he'll fit really well with, Sadiq Bey and Jeremy Grant. He'll fit really well with those guys based on what Detroit has already and kind of how their players play and what kind of play style they have. He's a guy who really will fit this team well if he can develop his ability to shoot the 3-ball and play a little bit better defensively because, like I said, he has the build to be a great defensive player. Now I want to talk about another rookie that Detroit has, and Killian Hayes. And it's been a struggle for him to really kind of stay healthy. He's only played 17 games. And in the 17 games that he's played, a lot of people, talk poorly about him. But honestly, in the 17 games he's played, I've seen some. I've been a little impressed. He's got to work on his ability to shoot the 3-ball, right? He can't shoot the 3-ball at all right now, and that needs a lot of work. But he really just needs to work on his ability, right? Not just the 3-ball, but he needs to kind of work on his ability to score. But I have seen flashes, even, in a couple games I saw him with Detroit, I have seen some flashes where you can see an ability that eventually down the line he'll be able to score if he can just learn how to, be more aggressive. I feel like sometimes he's too passive, right? Just be more aggressive and just have a will to score, right? He's a pass-first guy, so he's always going to have a pass-first mentality, and that's great because he's a great passer. He's going to be a great passer in this league. He's going to be a guy in his prime who can probably average 7-8 assists a game. But now will the scoring be there? That's the biggest question mark because he needs to be more aggressive on that end of the floor. He needs to take more shots. He can't take 3 or 4 shots, 5 shots a night. He needs to be able to take 8 to 12 to 13 shots a night if he wants to be, worthy of the number 7 pick that Detroit picked him at in this year's draft. But as I mentioned, he's a great playmaker and he shows great upside defensively. A lot of people are comparing him right now to Frank Ntilikina, and I think it's too early to say that's the kind of player he'll be like. We know Frank didn't turn out to be the type of NBA player that everyone thought he would. But I think Killian Hayes has more upside than that, in my opinion. I think Killian Hayes is probably not quite as good defensively, but I think he's an upscale playmaker. I think he has an ability to be a better scorer than Frank Ntilikina did, in my opinion. I just think Killian Hayes, he can get to the rim pretty well. He just, like I just said, he just has to learn to be more aggressive on the offensive end, and he has to learn how to insert that 3-point shot into his game, especially in this era, right? We know where 3-balls are being shot and made way more than they ever have. He's a point guard too, so he's going to need to learn how to shoot that 3-ball. And if he can just be a consistent, 3-point shooter who can make 100+ threes a year, let's say he makes 110 threes a year next year, and we know, like I said earlier, he can get to the rim, and he can just be more aggressive. Instead of taking 5 shots a night, he can take 12 or 13 shots a night. He can be a guy next year who can average 13 and 6 with good defense too, and that's a plus for this Detroit team who's relatively young and they're in the rebuilding process. And that would end up being a good pick. And also the fact with him is that he just has to stay healthy. So those are the biggest factors in Killian, and Hayes' development and, the things that are holding his development back. But in my opinion, I think Killian Hayes is going to end up being a solid player in this league. I don't think he's ever going to be a great scorer, but I think he's going to be a good enough scorer where you can put him at your starting point guard because of his ability to play make and play defense. And I think eventually he can turn himself into an efficient scorer. Not a high-end scorer, right? But an efficient one. And that's, that's a positive. So, another young guy that we got to keep our eyes on in Detroit and be interesting to see how he develops. And I know a lot of Pistons fans are really anxious. They're not too happy right now with, the whole injury thing and how, they've seen him on the court. But as I mentioned, I've seen him and I've actually seen some flashes and I think he's going to end up being a good player. I just think he's going to be one of the developmental guys who takes a little more time than some other guys to end up being a good player. So make sure we keep an eye out on that one for sure. So that's going to wrap it up for my first portion of the segment with the Detroit Pistons. And now I'll get into my second segment talking about the Los Angeles Lakers. So for the Los Angeles Lakers this year, it's really kind of been a tough season. When they were fully healthy, they were great, right? But you had the injury to Anthony Davis, who's back now. I think he's played his third game last night against the Wizards. And then you had LeBron a couple months ago go down, and they're saying LeBron's going to get hurt, or going to come back, in the next couple weeks. So, let's see how that affects him for the playoffs. Because missing a lot of time is never a good thing, right? Because, when you miss so much time, you have to get acclimated to the game in a way. Even in a guy like LeBron, who's been in the league for so long and he's one of the greatest players ever, he's still going to have to find his groove, you know what I'm saying, in a way, and get back to playing at a high level. He's going to need a couple regular season games, in my opinion, just to kind of get back in the feel of it, and then he should be fine for the playoffs. So I think the goal for the Lakers should be, if he's healthy, to bring him back for a couple games in the regular season at least, so he can kind of just get back and get in the flow a little bit and get back in the rhythm before the playoffs start. So he just doesn't go into the playoffs, with missing, 5 months of basketball. So, with the loss of the Wizards right now, the Lakers are the 5 seed in the West. They're 36-26. They're a game and a half above Dallas. And then they're 2 games above Portland for that 7 seed, that play-in game. And obviously, I mentioned the play-in game is not somewhere you want to be, right? As much as you trust Anthony Davis and LeBron, and yes, if they were to get in a play-in game and that team is fully healthy, they're going to win the play-in series. But you don't want to put it to that. You don't want to have to bring it to that, right? Because if that ends up being the case, somebody gets hurt or somebody doesn't play a good game, you could lose and that's it. Your season's over in that playing game format. So definitely something that, I think the Lakers are monitoring now, and they want to be able to obviously stay within that. They're not going to jump down to 4 anymore, so they want to be able to stay within that 5 to 6 range. Maybe though I think they'll end up swapping with Dallas and they'll end up being the 6th seed, which means they might play the Clippers in the first round. But, definitely something the Lakers are definitely monitoring, and I think they'll end up being the 6th seed, and Dallas will end up jumping to 5. But I don't see the Portland jumping the Lakers looking at both teams' remaining schedules, and Portland hasn't really been playing well lately. They did win last night against Memphis, but, they did lose 2 against Memphis not too long ago in a row. So Portland's really been struggling lately. They lost to Boston a couple days ago, too. The Portland's really been struggling lately, and I don't see Portland jumping the Lakers to hop to 6. If anything, I see Portland going down to 8 and Memphis moving up to 7. So got to keep our eye out on that one in the Western Conference. So looking at this Lakers team, I would ask myself, really, what is the main difference between this year's Lakers team that has had a lot of injuries and a lot of COVID situations as well, compared to last year's Lakers team who won the championship against Miami in 6 games. And I would say the biggest difference really with this year's Lakers team is I think they're more deep this year. You've seen the development of Taylor Horton-Tucker. He's developed his game even more. He's been great for them off the bench. You've seen Caruso take a step forward in his game on the defensive end and his ability to shoot and his playmaking ability, very underrated. You've seen KCP take a step forward this year in games where LeBron or Anthony Davis doesn't play. KCP's, taking the load on, and he scored. And, KCP also plays the defensive end of the floor as well. So this is a team, again, this year who kind of has the same identity as they had last year. Play through LeBron and Anthony Davis, and the rest of the guys are good enough to get us enough points and enough rebounds, enough assists, enough defensive effort to get us over the hump and win the championship, right? Everything obviously is going to revolve around LeBron and Anthony Davis. And since Anthony Davis got back, it's been his 3rd game back, as I mentioned earlier, from injury, I think it is. Last night against the Wizards, it was his 3rd game back. He's been a little slow to the jump, But every game's gotten a little progressively better if you watch the games. And I've seen those games, and he's, gotten progressively better every game. So Davis, like I said, same thing's going to be with LeBron. It's just going to take a little bit of time for those guys to get back in their rhythm. And that's why I think the Lakers should bring back LeBron a week or two before the regular season if they can. Right? You don't want to push it, but if they can, and he feels like he can play, I'd bring him back, maybe limit his minutes, but just bring him back and get him back in that rhythm so when the playoffs come around, he can play 40 minutes a night, pretty much play the whole game and just dominate. Right? That's the goal for the Lakers, Anthony Davis, I'm not worried about Anthony Davis. I think he'll get back into his rhythm, his normal rhythm in short time. He did struggle a little more this year, even when he was healthy at the beginning of the year before the injury. But no, I'm not really nervous. Anthony Davis won't get back into his rhythm come playoff time when the lights shine bright because we saw what he was able to do in the playoffs last year. So, and now LeBron and Anthony Davis, have more help around them. You looked at last year's team and you said, okay, they weren't. A lot of people made the excuse that team wasn't very deep, and people thought they weren't going to win the championship last year because of that solo reason. So, they won the championship last year without having that, arguably, and now they have that. So you see how much better they can be come playoff time. Because you still have Dennis Schroeder and you still have Montrezl Harrell, who you added this offseason. So those are two guys that you got to keep an eye out for, too. Those are the two best bench players on this team, obviously. But as I mentioned earlier, you got KCP still, you got Taylor Horton Tucker, you got Kuzma, who's a little inconsistent, but at times he shows, positive energy on the floor. So definitely a team who is going to be better in the playoffs this year if they're fully healthy, in my opinion. LeBron plays even better when there's a bench around him to complement him, right? Because LeBron is going to get everybody involved, and when LeBron has more guys coming off the bench that can score and that cut to the basket well and that shoot really well, it's going to give LeBron more opportunities to make everyone else around him better, and that just makes LeBron an even better player, which is scary because he's already, arguably the best player in the world. So that makes it even scarier, in my opinion, knowing that LeBron has even more scorers around him coming off the bench than he did last year. It's going to be interesting to see what the Lakers are going to do in the playoffs this year. My opinion is they'll be fully healthy come playoff time, and everyone will be ready to go. But, yeah, like I said, I think they're scarier in the playoffs this year. But I think the competition is also, a little bit better. So, where do you draw the line there? It's going to be such an interesting playoffs, and, I hope the Lakers are fully healthy because that's, basketball is better when you see the Lakers fully healthy. But yeah, I think for the Lakers, their biggest threats, in my opinion, are Utah, because I think Utah's ability to move the ball around, rebound. Utah has size against them. See, that's one thing the Lakers have had last year and have this year too when they're fully healthy, is they have size against a lot of teams. They can out-rebound a lot of teams, right? Even losing McGee and Dwight Howard, you grab Montrezl Harrell, you still have Anthony Davis, and, of course now you have Andre Drummond. So, and I'm going to get to Andre Drummond in a second, the addition of him and what I think how he'll fit into this team. But, yeah, this is a team that's probably just as good rebounding as last year, if not better. So that's the one thing with Utah. That's the one thing why I think Utah will give them a threat, because Utah has the ability to rebound with them, which a lot of teams didn't have last year. So, Utah also has great individual defense. They can throw multiple guys at Dennis Schroeder. They can throw multiple guys at LeBron and Anthony Davis. And Drummond down low, and Taylor Horton Tucker, right? So and KCP. So Utah has great individual defense. They have great post defense. They rebound well. They pass the ball well. So Utah is a very good all-around team, and they are going to be a threat to the Lakers this year in the playoffs. I think there's three threats to the Lakers in the playoffs. I think Utah's one of them. I think the other one is Phoenix. Phoenix has played the Lakers this year. I don't think Anthony Davis played. I think they played him twice. The second time, I don't think Davis or LeBron played, but the first time I believe LeBron played, and Phoenix beat him pretty good. Not that means much, but, because we've seen LeBron and lose to, teams in the regular season by this amount of points, but then in the playoffs, they'll play him in a series and they'll win, he'll beat him 4-1 or 4-0. So, not that means much, but Phoenix is a very good defensive team. I don't know if they quite have the size or the rebounding ability to stay with the Lakers. That's the only bad thing about Phoenix. I don't think they can rebound with the Lakers, which I think will, turn them to lose against the Lakers if they play them, in my opinion. But they are one of the threats, in my opinion. They are one of the threats because they can outrun the Lakers and they can outshoot the Lakers. And you have a veteran in Chris Paul who knows what he's doing. He knows how to pick his spots in the playoffs. He knows who to defend. He knows, what's going on in every play. He can almost like pick plays before they come. So he's going to tell Booker, where to be, what to do. He's going to tell Ayton, Bridges, those guys, Crowder, right? Paul's going to be the quarterback, basically, of that team in the playoffs like he has all year. And anytime you got Chris Paul, you got a running chance. And now you got Booker. You have Booker as well, too, of course. So, yeah, no, Phoenix is definitely going to be a threat to the Lakers, in my opinion. I don't think they can beat them, but they can give them a run for their money. And maybe if the Lakers are off their A game, maybe Phoenix has an opportunity. So, got to keep an eye out there. The last team I would say would have an opportunity to beat the Lakers, in my opinion. I would have said Denver. Now with the injury, Jamal Murray is going to be tough. Denver probably would have been my top team to beat the Lakers. I had Denver going to the NBA Finals before Jamal Murray got hurt, right? And, I talked in an earlier podcast saying maybe Portland can make it. But now the last couple games I've watched Portland, I've seen them taking their foot off the gas. I know it's still the regular season. They're going to obviously make the playoffs. But I've just seen them take their foot off the gas too much, and I've seen certain guys struggle that I wouldn't think would struggle. So, we'll see what happens with Portland. That'll be really interesting too. But no, Denver was a team that I thought would beat the Lakers if they were fully healthy. Now with the injury of Jamal Murray, it's going to be tough. So hopefully next year Denver can, get to the finals and possibly win the whole thing. But for the final team that I think will give the Lakers a tough series or have an opportunity to beat them, in my opinion, will be the Clippers. Now the Clippers, you look at their roster this year, and yeah, they're a little more bleak than last year. You just don't have as much depth. But Paul George is playing better than last year, much better. Kawhi's playing better, in my opinion. He just has to stay healthy. He hasn't really been healthy, but he'll be fine playoff time. And then you have, Reggie Jackson, who's taken a step forward in his game this year. Marcus Morris has taken a step forward. As I mentioned, you don't have the same depth, but a lot of the guys have taken steps forward, so that kind of replaces the depth, in my opinion, and it kind of makes them about the same team as they were last year. So, yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier, we might see a potential Clippers-Lakers first-round series, so that's going to be a great series. I hope we do get to see that in the first round. Playoffs are going to be great this year. We've had a lot of situations this year with seedings moving around a lot this year, a lot of tight playoff races, a lot of tight seedings this year, especially in the East, but in the West as well. So the playoffs are going to be great this year. It's going to be great competition. I think everyone's playing at a higher level than they ever have, in my opinion. So, yeah, just imagine if you get that Clippers-Lakers series in the first round. The Clippers will be out for revenge. And guys like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are going to play way better than they did last year in the playoffs. I can tell you that right here, right now. They had a struggle last year in the playoffs. They are going to play way, way, way better this year than they did last year. They just will. It's pretty much a fact. They're going to play way better. And, going to be interesting come playoff time to see what teams are able to give the Lakers the toughest series or what team can beat the Lakers. The Lakers are not an unbeatable team. They can be beaten. So, the West is really tough this year. So the Lakers are gonna have a tougher go this year than they did last year. Let me talk really quick about Andre Drummond before I wrap it up. Andre Drummond was a great addition, in my opinion. He's a great rebounder. He's an underrated scorer down low. He still can't shoot a jump shot or really shoot well from the free throw line. He's improved from the free throw line, but he still needs work there. And the jump shot's still not there. But he provides this team something that Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee provided for them last year, just efficient down low scoring and good rebounding. But the one thing that he doesn't do that JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard did for you last year is Andre Drummond is not a great defensive player. And I think as much as he's going to help the Lakers and as much as that was a great addition and he fits that team well, that could end up being one thing that could come back to bite them against the Western Conference where you have a ton of good big men, right? And you have a lot of teams that have a good power forward or good front court, really, a good power forward and a good center, right? You go and you look at Phoenix, for example. You have Crowder, who's good, and then you have DeAndre Ayton, right? You go look at Utah. You have Royce O'Neal, who's solid. You have Rudy Gobert, right? You have Denver with Michael Porter Jr. and then Jokic. So, I mean, you look at Drummond, he's going to struggle defensively. He's going to get scored on a lot down low because, he's not a great defensive player. We know that. We've known that since he's been in Detroit. He hasn't taken any steps forward on the defensive end. So, it could be a mismatch down low, which is something that you didn't get last year with McGee and Howard. McGee and Howard might not have been crazy offensive players, but they gave you enough of an efficient offense, which Drummond does. But they gave you steady defensive play every night. You could rely on them to at least hold their own on defense, and Drummond really can't do that, in my opinion. So, when they play teams like Utah, yeah, you could put Anthony Davis on Rudy Gobert, and you'll probably be fine there. Anthony Davis is a great defensive player. But then, where are you going to put Drummond? Drummond's too slow to guard Royce O'Neal, right? Royce O'Neal's more of a shooter, but he'll drive right. But even as he is more of a shooter, he can still drive. He'll drive right past Drummond. So probably the Lakers probably go to a zone defense, in my opinion, and just hope that Drummond can just be physical down low and just, block shots and just kind of stay in his area. And, if he can do that, the Lakers will, they'll be tough again, of course. And that will kind of take away from Drummond's weak ability to play defense. So, yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on with Drummond on the defensive end, in my opinion. I think teams will attack the Lakers will attack Drummond if the Lakers decide to play man. But I think the Lakers will go into that zone defense. And Drummond will still be attacked in the zone defense. He just won't be attacked as much, and it'll be harder to kind of solely focus and go against Andre Drummond on the offensive end. So that's going to wrap it up today for episode number 7. Make sure you tune in to every episode when I drop them. And again, make sure you go follow the Instagram page at Sizzle Podcast. And then make sure you also go follow the new Instagram page at Sizzle Football. That podcast will be dropping today as well. Episode number 1. I'm going to do a post-draft podcast, as I mentioned earlier. So make sure you tune into both of those episodes, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode.